Welcome to Generation Citizens Educator Webinar Series, talking about census with special guests Geronimo Gallegos from the Census Bureau and Jaysha Lyons at Hawk of Oklahoma Policy Institute.
It's 2020 and time for the census. It's an opportunity for you to create a better future for your children or grandchildren.
It's also a way for you to stand up for yourself, your tribe or nation, and your heritage.
Taking the census is easy. This is the first year you can complete the census online or by using a mobile device. Why does the census matter? The census has an impact on every single person in your life. The more people that take the census, the more funding we get.
Census data determines healthcare funding for you and your family.
It means my students get more resources and federal funding for their education.
It can mean new investments and job opportunities in your neighborhood.
Without people like you to take the census, Oklahoma City can lose funding for all of that.
Be counted, OKC.
Be counted, OKC.
Be counted, Oklahoma City.
Be counted.
Be counted!
Your city needs you, and your future is counting on you.
Today we'll follow this agenda to review the importance of the census, learn about targeted community outreach efforts in your state, and do a deep dive into GC's Talking About Census curriculum. By the end of this workshop, you will have, again, reviewed the importance of participating in the 2020 census, reviewed community outreach efforts, and reviewed Talking About Census materials. Some of you have already gotten started with the chat feature, but let's get some more practice. We love to hear why the census is important to you and the community you represent. Please share your responses by using the chat feature at the right hand of your Zoom menu bar. Simply click the speech bubble and type. We represent multiple communities and identities, and we all want to ensure all of our communities are counted for the 2020 census. So why is it important to you? Amy, our Oklahoma Executive Director, is on our line. If you have any issues during our webinar today, please feel free to use this chat feature. You can also chat us privately. And we have, and I'm so sorry if I am pronouncing your name incorrectly, but Talania. Everything is determined by the census count. Oklahoma already doesn't get the funding it needs at the state level, and she doesn't want it to be the same at state and national level. Nancy believes it's important because our representation in the House is determined by our population. And Lucas, also from GC, the census is important to me because I know how important an accurate count is to funding crucial programs for the students we work with and everyone. These are all valid reasons to care about the census, and I am sure you have so many more. And with us today to talk about the importance of the census as well, is our first guest, Geronimo Gallegos. He is the Senior Partnership Specialist for the Census Bureau and is here to share with us an overview of the census, what's going on, and how you can be involved. Geronimo, welcome. And as you introduce yourself, could you also share why the census is important to you?
Absolutely. Thank you for this great opportunity. The census is very important to all of us because it represents hard work by Census Bureau workers, but more importantly, it's about our communities. It's important that we all participate and get counted in the 2020 census. Congress has many reasons to exist, but the number one is in our Constitution that states that we have to conduct a population count of all persons living in the United States. Thank you. At this point, if you would like to play the quick video on what is the 2020 census, that would play for just a moment for everyone to listen.
I'm
In
sorry,
particular,
Geronimo. It seems like we don't have the video right now.
okay, why we conduct and why we take the census. The Constitution under Article 1, Section 2 mandates that the census to provide the data for apportionment of representatives among the 50 states for the House of Representatives every 10 years. By law, the U.S. Census Bureau must deliver a report of the population counts to the President of the United States within 9 months of Census Day, or in this case, this year would be December 31st, 2020. So it's to take, apportionment can be taken. The big picture is that we're counting for dollars. The census data brings money to Oklahoma and to all states. Federal monies allocated for states based on fiscal year 2016 were based on decennial census counts that included our top 5 medical assistance programs, federal direct student loans, supplemental nutrition program for infants, women, and children, or WIC, Medicare Part B, and highway planning and construction. In particular, Oklahoma receives $9 billion each year. Every state has that same amount or greater depending on their population counts. Go ahead to the next slide. In particular, the census brings data and money to Oklahoma. Federal Pell Grant programs, Section 8 housing. It's very important to be able to explain to folks what type of services they are being provided based on census population figures. And so you can see the list of different programs, from temporary assistance for needy families, national school lunch programs, the federal education grants, federal transit, so people taking buses to work. Head Start is dependent on that. School breakfast programs, career tech and education grants, business and industry loans, low-income home energy assistance, just to name a few, adoption assistance, community facilities, loans and grants, and crime victim assistance programs. This will impact all of our budgets through the year 2030. Next slide. In particular, the apportionment, as you can see here, based on the 2010 official results, there were states that gained and there were states that lost. In particular, as you can see here, Oklahoma stayed even from the 2010 census, but some states gained 1 or 2 representatives. As you all should be aware now, there are 435 seats. So based on the population count, the Congress will be apportioned accordingly. The state of Texas in 2010 gained 4 representatives. Go ahead with the next slide. How you can get involved with the 2020 census. In particular, you all are already learning about the census information through your organization, but the Census Bureau also has statistics in the schools. I encourage you all to use the Census in the Schools program that you can find by going to census.gov/schools to learn a little bit more about that. Next slide. You can also apply for census jobs. In particular, the jobs are paying anywhere from $14 to $21 an hour. Here in Oklahoma, you can text 313131 for Oklahoma jobs, but we also want you to share the information or go to your social media at 2020census.gov/jobs. We encourage everyone to apply now. We are still in need of census workers between now and when the census questionnaires begin to go out into communities. which that will be the week of March the 12th through the 20th, coming up starting next Thursday. The online questionnaire that is going to be received by all households is available for you to view the Spanish guide or the English guides. In particular, these guides can be found on YouTube and give you quite a bit of information on asking the families the different variety of questions that are going to be on the questionnaire. Those questions range from tell us about how many people live in your household to the age of all persons, the ethnicity, the race, whether the person owns the house or they're renting an apartment or mobile home, etc. But also, it also asks important information about the relationship between the persons. Is this maybe your grandmother or your spouse, your child, etc.? Go ahead to the next slide. In particular, you can also join a local complete count committee. This is a working group that engages everyone in a city, in a county, or in a state, wherever you are. This is a map that you can go to under the www.census.gov/2020 CCC. This will provide you a local map where you can click on it for your state or for your community to see how many complete count committees are available perhaps in your own city or in your own neighborhood. You can also add the 2020 census to your meeting agendas for your schools, for your staff meetings, or for your parent-teacher conferences that you are going to be having. Yeah, you can add the information to your website from the 2020census.gov website, but you can also follow official Census Bureau social media channels and share our content. Learn about your hard to count parts of the community via Rome that basically tells you what the responses have been in census past, along with our American Community Survey. I brought up earlier about using statistics in the schools materials in your classroom. This week in particular is National Statistics in Schools Week. It's happening right now from March 2nd through the 6th. And we want to make sure that you are using that material with your students between now and when we're done with the census, which will be probably sometime around July 30th. We'd like you to share materials from our partner site, again, at the 2020census.gov. And in particular, during the week of March the 27th through the 29th, we will be scheduling a worship weekend. So we encourage you to talk to your pastor at your church or to your faith-based organizations in your communities to get them involved, even if it's just putting information about the 2020 census in their bulletin boards or in their programs or their information that folks can take home with them. But more importantly, it's important for us to tell your friends, family, and neighbors that the census is easy, safe, and important. The one thing to keep in mind is that under Title 13, all information that is provided to the Census Bureau is confidential. We do not share your information with anyone, and any census employee that has been sworn to the information takes an oath to protect that information. If someone breaks that privilege, they stand to go to jail for up to 5 years and be fined up to $250,000. So it's critical for us to make sure that families understand why it's so important. The Census Bureau will never share your information with law enforcement, with ICE. It will not share it with the housing authority or with the community city or anyone. That's the law. My information is listed there. Feel free to contact me and ask me any questions before we depart today, but my information is there and I'll be happy to put you in contact with someone locally if you would like to partner with the 2020 census.
Geronimo, thank you so much for all of this information. I saw in the chat that folks were interacting and having those aha moments. So I do hope you all are tweeting those. and adding hashtag 2020 census. With that said, if you all have any questions in our last minute or two with Geronimo, feel free to share them in the chat. And if we don't have time to answer them today, we will be sure to forward them to him directly and hopefully get a response. The other thing I'd like to mention while you're thinking of your questions and dropping them in the chat is that some of the resources that, all of the resources that Geronimo has shared here today will be included in a resource page that I'll be emailing you out in about 1 week from today. So things like the census, the statistics in schools, and other important information and resources that he's shared will be in this 2 pages at least of resources. Great, it seems like people are excited about receiving materials. Great, so as we move through again, feel free to drop your questions or thoughts in the chat feature and we will try our best to address them as we move along. But Geronimo, thank you so much for your time. And we will be sure to share any questions with you either during this webinar or afterwards. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
So we also have another census expert, which I'm excited to present. This is Gisha Lyons Echo Hawk from Oklahoma Policy Institute Census. She is a census community builder. Sorry about that. She's also a lifelong Oklahoman and a proud tribal citizen of the Seminole Nation, as well as a member of the Pawnee, Iowa, Omaha, and Creek Nations. Gisha, welcome to our webinar. Are you here with us? Great, yes. I can hear you. Welcome. And then we would love if you could start by sharing why the census is important to you, and then we can take it from there.
For sure. Noah, hello, everybody. Thank you for attending this webinar today and learning about the need and importance of the census and the efforts that need to be collectively shared going forward. So as Juanita said, I am with Oklahoma Policy Institute, so I just want to briefly introduce my organization. We are a nonpartisan independent policy think tank. We focus on issues related to education, health, the justice system, and budget and taxes within the state of Oklahoma. We took on the effort of the census because our state did not fund the census 2020. So there's many collective organizations that we have been working and identifying with, local governments, tribal governments, faith-based communities, in this complete effort to make sure every Oklahoman is counted. The outreach branch of our work is through Together Oklahoma, and that's the nonpartisan coalition of citizens that work together to basically address issues that directly impact or affect your local communities. We have about 12 chapters. Some of those chapters are based in Oklahoma City, Tulsa, Stillwater, Woodward, Ardmore, McAllister, oh my goodness, Lawton, Duncan. There's just to name a few. So the census, if you can go ahead and flip to the slide, why it's in, so I was asked to talk about the hard to reach count communities and census outreach efforts. It's kind of a wordy slide. It's the only slide that I have outside of my contact info, but hard to count is the verbiage of the Census Bureau. It's not anything that I particularly enjoy just because I think it's kind of a misnomer. But really what it is those that are hard to locate, those that are hard to contact, those that are hard to persuade, and those that are hard to interview. In Oklahoma, a lot of our undercounted or underrepresented in the census are in communities in Southeast Oklahoma and Northwest Oklahoma. Really persons residing in rural or geographically isolated areas. Within that, there are different groups or populations that tend to be underrepresented in our census counts. Those at the top of the list, regardless of racial or ethnic group, are young children, especially children under the age of 5. And then the second most undercounted group would be children ages 6 to 9. So basically, children in Oklahoma that are under the age of 9. This matters when you think about complex household situations where you might have several blended families living in a home, multiple generations, or homes with non-relatives. I mean, you have families sometimes that'll go through different homes, not necessarily having one place that they stay at. So those families tend to not be counted. If they're single parents, if the single parent does not do the census form for themselves, it's more likely that they will not return one on their children either. There is information that shows that our last decennial census in 2010 revealed that it was, well, sorry, let me pull my notes. Where did we go? This is from kidscount.org. They are a great resource, especially for you all that are in our public school system. We had children that were, when there was a census turned in for a home with children in it, 4 in 5 of those families did not include young children on it. And it was 1 in 5 children were missed because their families simply did not return a form. When you think about the fact that the census is a 10-year budget, that's a whole childhood for a lot of our kids that we're dealing with, where funding is not being adequately supplied. As Geronimo mentioned, it affects Title I schooling, which is like our school reduced and free lunches. It also impacts Medicaid and CHIP, which is the Children's Health Insurance Program. Going back to some of those hard to count communities, you'll also notice that there are racial and ethnic minorities identified within that. So think about your families of color, African American families, Latinx or Latino families, Native Americans. Native Americans, regardless of age, are one of the most undercounted communities in the census. In some research, this particular group is identified as statistically insignificant. And that's unfortunate when so many of the federal funding for tribal communities are impacted by census counts. We also have undocumented immigrants or recent immigrants, those that do not speak English fluently. So you might have children who know English, but they're only at the level that of the age that they are, or the grade that they are, but their parents don't understand English. So having a census form that is not conducive to that family's first language will impact whether or not they attempt to fill out the census. Cultural and linguistic minorities are also some folks that are hard to, that will be impacted by the inability or a barrier for the census. There are folks too, it's been identified that particularly in our southeast part of the state, or not even just the southeast, just anywhere in the nation, those that are low income or living in poverty, those that do not have more than a high school diploma, or if that, and those with young children are ones that are going to be the undercounted or underrepresented in our census count. With respect to what Oklahoma policy is doing, we, as I stated, we are focusing on the areas of Southeast Oklahoma and Northwest Oklahoma, as those have had statistical undercounts. Geronimo mentioned that you can view the rate of response live through the census website, census2020.gov. You will be able to see, who in your community is turning the census, returning the census back. It's not going to identify individuals, but it'll just show the clusters of community. And as far as you all are concerned, you have, you know, the power and the ability to continue to educate your families that you're working with, to remind them, you know, to do the census, and, you know, how it will impact not just like whether the children are fed, but also the education dollars that go into their communities, especially for those that have special education. It's the IDEA, those dollars. So as I stated, we're working with partner organizations, tribal nations, local governments for the Get Out the Count. We are hosting census information centers in coordination with those Get Out the Count events. And as far as like tips for you all going forward, you can certainly follow us on social media. We're at OK Policy, at OK Policy, or at Together OK. But you can also, you know, be inclined to host a workshop within your community. If your community has a complete count committee, I think all counties in Oklahoma have been identified with having some kind of complete count committee. And those are made up of individuals such as yourselves, educators, health workers, elected officials, faith leaders, tribal leaders, a lot of folks that make up the fabric of your community coming together to kind of strategize their efforts, and how you not only raising up the awareness, but you're also putting it into action. Because the census is available online, it will be super beneficial to coordinate with libraries or technology centers, any place that has a consistent Wi-Fi or internet access. As our research shows, about 20% of Oklahomans do not have that access. So that's what we're doing. We're coordinating our efforts, and it really helps too with respect to some of these tribal nations that intersect with your cities and your communities, because some of their spaces do have Wi-Fi. Their casinos, their travel plazas, the health clinics, and the community centers. You can provide information to your families and to your fellow coworkers about the importance and benefits of participating in the 2020 census. And then you can also invite people like Geronimo to come talk to your community. Our Oklahoma Policy Institute is going to host our own Census Day launch, actually not on the Enumeration Day, which is April 1st, but we're going to host it in Ardmore on April 3rd in collaboration with some community partners, as well as the Chickasaw Nation, and with an appearance by the Thunder Organization, which is our NBA team located in Oklahoma City. They're going to come out, and we're going to just have a family-friendly event. Hopefully we get a lot of community that will come out, and we'll have a mobile questionnaire assistance folks available to help us with those folks who have their codes and want to complete the census on site with us. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer any.
Thank you so much, Jaysha. I really appreciate all this information. And just so you all know, whenever on your screen there's like a strange looking gray box to the right, for some reason that's happening when I open my chat box. So I apologize for the technical glitch, but I'm taking a peek here and there and trying to share some thoughts as well. With that said, if you have any questions for Jaysha, this would be a great opportunity. If not, as I mentioned before, I'll be sharing resources with you all, and we all have her contact information, so I'll go back to that screen too, just in case you want to, oops, that's me, if you want to take a peek at that. But like all educators, I will give you some wait time in case you have some questions for either of our guests today. All right, so I'm going to move forward. Again, Jaysha and Geronimo, thank you so much for taking time today and for preparing all of this information. We look forward to continuing our collaboration with you here. And there is a, well, thank you too, Geronimo. So hopefully you'll be able to stick around for the rest of our presentation. But if not, we look forward to, again, collaborating with you. So as I shared earlier, my name is Juanita Montes de Oca, and I am a GC staff member. I work on the National Program Team as the Manager of National Program and Curricular Development, where I use my former GC classroom experience and passion for Action Civics to lead the design of resources, such as this, talking about census curriculum. GC has been providing an Action Civics curriculum professional development to a growing number of school districts within our 6 sites, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New York, Oklahoma, Texas, and California, as well as to remote partners in places like Salt Lake City, Utah, and Paris, Kentucky. Our amazing educators guide students through an Action Civics experience in which students select an issue in their community by consensus, engage in participatory action research to determine the root cause of their issue before they propose and advocate for a policy goal to their state or local government. If you're interested in learning more about GC's core curriculum, feel free to reach out to me directly or log on to our website. We also have several GC Oklahoma staff members on our call, so feel free to chat them as well. Before we dive into the curriculum, I want to share a bit about a pedagogy that we use when we design our curriculum or our materials here at GC. As you might know, Gloria Ladson-Billings pioneered the concept of culturally relevant pedagogy as a way of engaging all learners who are outside the mainstream. For example, students that identify as people of color, low income, or undocumented. We're wondering, as you strive to engage all learners, what does culturally responsive teaching look like in your classroom? Or for those without a classroom, feel free to share examples of how you've seen culturally responsive teaching practices in classrooms you've visited. Please share your response via the chat feature at the right hand of your Zoom bar. And again, that little gray box is going to pop up because I'm going to take a peek at what folks are saying. So what does culturally responsive teaching look like? Connecting math concepts to my students' background, absolutely. Making it real world. I know in my former class, one of the things that I did was embrace my students' home language and theirs as assets and their families as assets, meaning into whatever expertise they might have. There's also the idea of communicating clear and high expectations for everyone, because your culture or background might not be the same as the mainstream. That does not mean it is equally important. So yes, there are countless ways to be inclusive of our students' cultures and lived experiences. It's particularly important to keep culturally responsive pedagogy at the forefront when we elevate topics such as citizenship, socioeconomic status in our classes. As we review the agenda for each lesson and discuss some of the activities your students will engage in, we'll pause to discuss ways you can ensure that you're inclusive of all of your students' lived experiences. Feel free to add your thoughts in the chat as we do so. For those familiar with GC's core curriculum, you'll know that it's designed around the steps of Action Civics process, with an emphasis on experiential learning. Our GC teachers guide students through the Action Civics process and support them as they engage with government officials and community leaders to advocate for their own policy goals. Talking About Census was designed in the same spirit, ensuring students are active participants in their learning and meaningfully engage with their community as they practice being engaged citizens. GC is also known for offering comprehensive resources that allow our partner teachers to focus on adapting lessons to meet their students' needs. As you can see, Talking About Census includes 5 overall resources designed with the same goal. First are the 4 action-based and experiential lesson plans. Our lessons include content and language objectives, because both are equal in importance and focus. However, we know that considering content in light of culturally relevant prior knowledge and content, excuse me, and content-specific sentence structures offers a solid foundation to deliver lesson plans that are responsive to all students in the classroom. We include multilingual learner adaptation strategies, or MLL strategies, which are instructional strategies you can use to promote language and content development. These additional strategies are explained in detail in each lesson. There are facilitation tips in the sidebar of the curriculum that include suggestions on modifying an activity for all learning needs. There are videos and other resource recommendations to help reinforce concepts, and best practices for supporting the holistic needs of culturally and linguistically diverse learners. There are also multiple opportunities for student reflection and assessment because, as we know, opportunities for critical and reflective thinking help our students to better process their experience and outcomes. There are outreach materials for families, which include Census Bureau materials and a GC-designed local immigration resource guide for each GC site, obviously including Oklahoma. We also included printable student handouts to align with each lesson, including a census overview, state-specific research, and an outreach toolkit to support students in planning their own outreach efforts. Finally, there is a slide deck that aligns with lessons and all of the activities, which is one of my favorite components as a former teacher. Taking the time to create slide decks it's very time consuming. So feel free to grab these and modify. Our lessons follow the workshop model, which allows students to maximize their experiential learning time. In this first lesson, students will read a census overview that's available in 9 languages, which will be great for them to share with their community outside of the school. Then they'll analyze a sample copy of the actual census questionnaire. Based on their review of the purpose of the Centennial Survey, they'll make inferences about the purpose of each question and discuss these with their peers. We provide you with a facilitator copy of the questions that includes possible responses and a clean copy for your students. For homework, they'll administer a mock census questionnaire with 2 to 3 members of their school community to be analyzed during the 3rd lesson. To avoid any confusion amongst local community members, it's important that your students limit their mock census interviews to the actual school building. Sadly, there are reported phishing incidents where someone pretends to be an official census taker and takes advantage of some of our most vulnerable populations. Back to culturally responsive teaching. As your students read the questions asked, they will likely have their own questions or thoughts about the difference between race and ethnicity. We've included the census definition for both and encourage you to review this with your students. After this webinar, I'll share additional resources that you might consider using, which include an amazing interactive platform called What Census Calls Us, a historical timeline created by the Pew Center's social and demographic team. It's really neat because you're able to click on a census year and compare the race and ethnicity categories reported on any given census in comparison to the 2010 reportings. You can also view an image of the actual questionnaire used that year, which is a history buff's dream. We also know that immigration and citizenship status can be traumatic issues for students and their families. Again, we've included a GC-designed local immigration resource guide for each site, including Oklahoma, that includes census expert information. It's also important to not make assumptions about our students' documentation status and not to directly ask questions regarding their status. Hopefully, you've fostered a democratic classroom culture in which your students are able to share their stories and ask questions. But even then, if you're not sure of the answer, it's wise to share that you do not know and point them towards resources or people that might know. In this second lesson, students will learn what a hard-to-count community is and explore some of the reasons individuals and communities may hesitate to participate in the census. In order to better understand and tackle the lack of participation, the Census Bureau has used behavioral science to identify the 4 most common concerns for lack of census participation. They are I don't think the census has any impact on my life, which we all know is not true. I don't feel comfortable sharing my information with the government, which is a fair assessment. However, we know that by law, the Census Bureau is not able to share information outside of the census folks. I have trouble completing the census forms. We know that there are multiple resources that folks can use to help. And then I don't have time to fill out the census. This year, you're also able to complete it online, which means you can complete it from your mobile device. What your students will do is create responses to each of the 4 concerns that might assist individuals in better understanding the importance of participation using the knowledge they acquired during Lesson 1 about census data and how it's collected, and use their understanding of their own community. To better understand the impact of an undercount, students analyze their state's Counting for Dollars 2020 report, which actually I believe Geronimo pointed to or alluded to earlier. This information shares data on census-guided federal financial assistance programs like WIC, which he definitely mentioned, that support each state. They'll identify the federally funded programs their own community benefit from to understand how their community could be negatively impacted by an undercount. For example, in Rhode Island, which I'm from, the total program obligation was over $3.8 billion in 2016, and they received over $30 million for school lunch programs. Every day, 72,000 Rhode Island students receive free or reduced lunch. Given this information, students can infer what would happen if there were fewer federal dollars allocated for school lunches. In other words, a lot of our students won't have a lunch. Culturally responsive teaching. In this curriculum, we're emphasizing the impact of the census on our communities while acknowledging and respecting that our students bring lived experiences into our classrooms that may raise real and valid concerns. For example, when we explore some of the reasons people may not participate in the census, we discuss the fear of being reported to immigration enforcement agencies or other law enforcement agencies, overall concerns about data privacy, and concerns about restricting respondents to identifying as male or female and not including sexual orientation or gender identity options. It's important to note that the Census Bureau has concluded that there is no federal data need to ask about sexual orientation and gender identity. Again, this could bring up some questions and emotional responses that are best to be prepared for. A couple of suggestions here are to, 1, remind students that sex and gender have different definitions, where sex refers to a biological assignment at birth, and gender refers to how a person identifies personally or societally. Again, in the resources I'll share with you after this webinar, I'll also include an article that may help your students explore and navigate this a bit further. Since in Lesson 2, students make the connection between census data collected and federally funded programs impacting their communities, now they need the opportunity to answer their now what? They know the census is important to their community. Now what can they do to minimize the possibility of an undercount? After analyzing their mock census questionnaire data from their homework assignment assigned in Lesson 1, they'll identify the census-guided federally funded programs their subset benefits from the most. Just as we do with our GC Action Civics curriculum in talking about the census, we guide students in taking action on a community issue by sharing various tactics they could use to make an impact in their community. We offer what we call a RAFT, or role audience format topic, as a tool to organize this community outreach, where students take on the role of a concerned community member, select an audience, a member of a hard-to-count community, or anyone that may hesitate for any of the 4 most common concerns, and then decide on a format. Although they're not limited to these tactics or formats, we do offer a toolkit for making a video, writing an op-ed, and creating a paper or digital infographic. And their topic is what they have learned about the importance and impact of census participation and how it impacts their audience specifically. Since students are collecting data only from their school community, we should emphasize that this is a very small group of people they're surveying and consider exposing them to the number of people who took the census in their community in 2010 compared to other communities by visiting the the response rate map that Geronimo mentioned earlier, and again is included in your additional resources. It's important to encourage students to be mindful of how they are received and who might receive them best. Let's remember that the census can be intimidating and even scary for some folks. And so students should be careful about approaching people they don't know or understand and trying to convince them to do something that may be scary. Remind students to consider where their hard-to-count audience spends time and the kinds of communication channels their audience likes and already uses. If, for example, their audience is a non-English speaker, writing an op-ed in an English language newspaper is not the most effective format. Perhaps creating a poster in that person's native language to hang in a local business would be more effective. In this final lesson, students will support their peers by offering critique on the outreach projects using the GLOWs and GROWs strategy. Teachers can empower students to view this critique process positively by maintaining norms and employing good procedures and structures. In doing so, you'll introduce a powerful strategy into the classroom culture, one that has numerous applications and lasting positive consequences, and then reconcile the feedback received. They will conclude the unit by making a commitment to reach out to a specific audience that may hesitate to complete the census. We encourage your students to display these commitments in a public space and even tweet them out, tagging GC and using, of course, hashtag 2020 census or census 2020, so that folks in your community are looped in. I'd also encourage you to share the community outreach projects by displaying them in your school and inviting the local community in to learn about the work your students have engaged in. Naturally, you'll also want your students to share the project with the intended audience. I'm sure you're wondering how to get a copy of the Talking About Census curriculum. Well, if you're participating in the live webinar, you'll complete a survey. Upon submitting the survey, you'll receive the curriculum via email. If you're viewing this pre-recorded webinar, you'll return to the Google form, answer a couple of questions, submit, and receive the materials via email. If you have any issues, please be sure to email us. Thank you, and we look forward to hearing more about how your class is talking about census.